All right, in this video, I'm going to go over some jazz theory, and I'm going to give you some tips on how to look for changes in jazz songs and figure out a few hacks to help you learn how to solo over different changes in jazz standards. So I'm specifically talking about jazz standards here, not blues. Blues, we approach things a little bit differently. With typical straight ahead jazz, American songbook kind of jazz, you are going to find shifting tonal centers throughout each piece. So what that means is a song might say it's in E flat major, but by bar 2, as we'll see in a song we're looking at here today, it jumps into a totally different key just for maybe a bar or two. And then maybe a few bars later, it's back to E flat, and then a few bars later, it's in a totally different key. And this can be something kind of foreign to somebody who just plays pop music or rock music and wants to be able to analyze a piece of jazz music and know, okay, when I see these chords, I need to play these notes. Well, we're going to use some basic music theory, and I'm going to be talking about chord numbers. So we'll talk about the 2-5-1, which is a cadence, which means the 2 chord going to the 5 chord and then going to the 1 chord. And we're used to the cadences in classical music, which made their way into pop music, which would be 1, 4, 5, 1. And you can tell we feel like we've arrived home. We can tell that this is the tonal center, C major. So in jazz, the 2-5-1 is way more important. And so we'll look at the 2-5-1 and how it helps us figure out what key we're in temporarily. And then we'll also figure out that, if we just look at the 5, if we can figure out what the 5 key is, then we can also figure out momentarily what tonal center we're in and what notes we should play. So this is definitely kind of a reductionist theory that I'm showing you today, and you'd want to take it with a grain of salt, but it's a way to start getting into jazz. But let's just look at this, and I'll show you 2 different ways that you can look at chords and figure out what notes you need to play to solo on. And this works for piano, works for bass, it works for any solo instrument. We're not even really going to talk about voice leading or the important notes of the chords to solo on. We're just going to figure out what notes should I play over certain chords. This is going to assume you have some understanding of scales, and also assume that you have been practicing scales. So make sure you start practicing scales. And it's also going to assume that you understand this concept. Every major key has 3 major chords, the 1 chord, the 4 chord, the 5 chord. And then we also have 3 minor chords in every major key, the 2 chord, the 3 chord, and the 6 chord. We also have a diminished chord, which we're not going to worry about, but we'll get into that one in the minor video. And there are 3 different 7th chords that are going to be really important to us in this conversation. The first kind of 7th chord is a major 7th chord. And if we're in the key of C, we just take a C major triad and we add the 7 on top. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We add the 7, and every major key has 2 major 7 chords in it. So we've got the 1 chord and the 4 chord. Every major key has 3 different minor 7 chords. So we've got the 2 chord, the 3 chord, and the 6 chord can all have a minor 7 chord. So that's a minor chord with a 7 on top. And then we have 1 special chord in every major key called the dominant 7. And you hear how that's got a totally different quality. It's got some tension to it, and it makes us want to go back to there. It wants to resolve, that's what we call it. So if we know that every key has the certain amount of chords, we can start to do some detective work and really quickly figure out what notes we need to play. The first method would be to look at the chords you've got and see if you can see this 2-5-1 cadence happening in a certain bar of music. And if you can see it, then you know that you are going to play in the key of whatever the 1 is. So if we resolve from here to the 1 chord, anytime we see a dominant 7 chord, what we can do is we can play in the key of the 1 chord that it's going to. For that moment, I can play with the notes of the C major scale. So there's my G7, it's a 5 chord. Well, what's the 1? This is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, if I see an E7 chord, I know that that's the 5 of the key of A major or the 1 chord. So for that E7 chord, I can play just the notes of the A major scale. Problem is, how do you figure out the 1 chord quickly if this is new to you? Very often before you see a dominant 7 chord, you would see potentially a minor 7 chord going to the dominant 7 chord. So that's going to be a 2, 5, 1. And that's kind of the trick. So you're looking for dominant 7 chords, and especially dominant 7 chords that have a minor 7 right before it. So if it's got a minor 7 chord before it, it's probably going to be the 2 chord. You can tell by the distance between them, of course. And these happen everywhere. So most often you'll see at least a 2-5. You'll often see a 2-5-1. Sometimes it's just the 5. And what we can do on that 5 chord is still play in the key of whatever the 1 actually would be. So you do have to do some math here. I'll talk about another method before we go look at a song, and that would be to simply learn what's called modes. And so a mode is basically a scale that starts on a different scale degree. So we have a C major scale. This is called the major scale or the Ionian mode. The next scale degree up, which is D, or starting on the 2, we call that the Dorian mode. So you learn the Dorian scale for all 12 notes, and then you also learn something called the Mixolydian scale. And the Mixolydian scale starts on the 5th scale degree. So here we are, here's the 1st, and here's the 5th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there is the Mixolydian scale. So if you learned the Dorian mode and the Mixolydian mode for every key, then what you can do when you see a 2-5-1 or a 2-5, or even just a 5, which is a dominant 7, is you can simply play over the 2 chord of a new 2-5-1, play the Dorian scale. You get to the 5 chord or the 5-7 chord, you play the Mixolydian scale, and then when you get to the 1, you play in the major scale or the Ionian mode. You have to memorize 24 new scales to be able to do this. And so that's why I do like this other method for certain situations. Some people can just think F major, I know there's 1 flat in that. So if whether I'm starting on the G, 1 flat, no problem. Or whether I'm playing the C, 1 flat. Or whether I'm playing the 1 chord. So it's an easy way for you to visualize and to play those notes. But other instruments, like when I play guitar or bass, it's easier for me to go, okay, start on a D and just play the Dorian pattern and just learn the Dorian pattern. And then if I have to play a D sharp Dorian scale, I just move it up 1 fret and I play the exact same pattern. So guitarists and bass players have an advantage in that sense and might benefit better from the second way of looking at the chords. But I think for other instrumentalists, it might be easier when you're beginning to just think in the major key of the 1 chord in that moment. Now we're going to look at this song called Misty by the great Errol Garner. This is kind of the classic jazz song that's used in jazz school to explain stuff, and some people get really tired of hearing this song so many times, but the truth is it does have a lot of typical jazz motion in it as far as the chord progressions are concerned. And right now I am using a program called iReal Pro. I should do a different video about this, but iReal Pro is this brilliant app that you can get for your computer or you can get it for iOS. When you buy it, you go download 1,300 songs and they instantly show up in here and you can search for them and stuff like that. And then you can easily make arrangements. I make arrangements for my jazz combo all the time in this program. And you can see that we've got things like piano, bass, and drums. And I can change the tempo, I can change the key, I can change the instrumentation, I can change the style of the song. So right now this is set to a ballad. And when you press play, you'll hear all of your instruments, and you can even adjust the mix and take out the piano if you want to work on just your piano part. So this song is in E flat. I'm just going to change it to C major so it's a little easier to understand. At the beginning of Misty, we've got a C major 7. So that's the 1 chord. So I would just play C major scale over top of that. Next chord is a G minor going to a C dominant 7 chord. So there it is. There's our 2-5, classic 2-5. And that's a 2-5 in bar 2. So we're already outside of the key that we started in. So when we go to this G minor chord, if we know that's a 2 chord, very easy, we just jump down and think in the key of F. So now I can play just the notes from the key of F. And so you can see that perfect 2-5-1 right in the beginning of this song. That's not in the key that we started in. So if you open this standard and started playing in the key of C and started soloing in the key of C, by bar 2, you'd already be playing wrong notes, right? So with this kind of way of thinking, we shift into new tonal centers every time we see a 2-5, a 2-5-1, or even just a 5, a 5-7. It has to be a dominant 7 chord. So we look at bar 3. We are in the key of F major for this entire 2 bars. Then we go on to this next bar, a minor 7 chord going to a dominant 7 chord. That's a few steps away. We know that we are doing a 2-5. So if F is the 2, then E, or E flat, because of course we have to skip a semitone, so E flat is the key that we need to be thinking in. So when we get to that F minor, we start playing in the key of E flat. Still in the key of E flat over the 2-5. And then you'd think we'd go to an E flat major 7 chord, but he doesn't. He sneaks back to the 1 chord that we started in. So that's the thing that happens with these 2-5s. Sometimes they're only for a bar, sometimes they're only for a moment. And that's what makes this all so confusing. So we've switched in the first line. Your soloing would have to switch from C major to F major to E flat major, all in the first 4 bars, right? And then we go back to C major here, and we're stuck in C major for these whole 2 bars. Now we get to this bar, we've got another 2-5. So we've got E minor going to A7. So if the 2 chord is E minor, what's the 1 chord, or what key should we be playing in? Just go down 2 semitones and we're in D major. So for that one, we solo with the notes of the D major scale. And I'm starting on E, and we'll understand later on there's certain notes that we should emphasize, but don't worry about that right now. Just start having fun with it. And then we go to the 2-5, and then do we actually end up on D major? No, we end up on D minor because he's shifting again on us. So we call that a 2 to a 5. So now what's the 2? It's a D minor, jump down 2 semitones or a whole step, and we're in the key of C. So all white notes, and then we are back. So how many different 2-5s has he done in this whole first 8 bars? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A whole bunch of different keys that you need to be in. C major, F major, E flat major, C major, D major, C major. Now the other method I mentioned was that you can think in terms of the Dorian and the Mixolydian. So let's just look at that quickly, and we're going to see how iReal Pro helps you regardless of how you want to look at this and think about this. iReal Pro has other ways of helping us, and what we can do is turn on chord scales. Now when I click on a chord, it shows me the notes that I should be playing over this chord. I get to the next one, and sure enough, as I said, we are thinking of this as the 2, so the key should be just 1 flat, and you can see right here we've got 1 flat over the G minor and 1 flat over the C7. And they've also got the modes listed. So as I said before, you can think in terms of modes. So they've got the Dorian mode right here and the Mixolydian mode. So it's just, how do you want to think about this? Do you want to think of it in terms of modes and just memorize those on your instrument? Then go for it, do that. That might be an easier way in the long run, but the benefit of this other method is that for that moment, you're thinking in a totally different key, and that might be easier for you to grasp onto. We get to this chord right here, and we are now, F minor is the 2, so that means E flat is the key, 3 flats, and sure enough, there's 3 flats right there. And then we get to this one. This one should be 2 sharps because we've got the key of D major. Remember, E is the 2, the 1 would be D. So then here's our key of D major. And then we go here, D is the 2, so the key is C major, and we've got the key of C major right there. So I can go through this now, and I can start playing. So 0 flats, 1 flat, 3 flats. 0. Still C major. 2 sharps. 0. So you can hear as I'm going through, I'm trying to stick to the keys of whatever the 2, 5 or the 5 is at that moment, and those notes for the most part work. You're going to learn quickly that some notes don't sound great, like playing the 4, the 4th scale degree on a major 7. Just doesn't sound nice on a major 7 chord, so we kind of avoid that note or don't emphasize it. But these are all tips that you're going to learn later on, and you can start to trust your ear with those kinds of things as well. Get that practicing app, start practicing every day, and this stuff will start to become second nature for you. But it's all about kind of finding whatever ways work for you specifically. So hit that subscribe button and the bell, and we'll see you in the next video.